Hello there, Fresh Dreams Conference. I'm Cathy Madavan, and it is such a delight to be with you again. It just seems impossible that it was a year ago that we were together, and I was talking to you about those amazing verses from the book of Philippians where we said, forgetting what's past and the ways we've always done things before, we press on towards the goal, towards uncertainty, towards the new. Who knew that this year was going to be quite what it's been? But it is great to be with you again, and it is really exciting, I think, and timely to be thinking about this theme of going back to the future, thinking about the words from Jeremiah, those ancient paths, but knowing that we're at a junction where we have to look both backwards, but also we have to look forwards. And so I'm going to be spending a little bit of time with you at this conference, and also Mark is going to be joining me for the next session, the Digging Deeper session, on this subject of being resilient disciples who actually make resilient disciples. And it's going to be such an important topic for us in this season, I think. Resilience has, been a bit of a buzzword anyway, hasn't it? But in a year like the one we've just had, to really think about how we keep on keeping on, how we persevere, and how we not only adapt and bounce back, but actually how we look for signs of growth and strength building, so that we really do become resilient in the sense that we build capacity, we build inner strength for the journey ahead as we look past. So hopefully it's going to fit in with this theme really well, but it's also going to help us not only to build ourselves, but also to think about how we build strength in others at this time as well. Now, obviously, as we all know, storms of life are completely normal. It seems that we get thrown curveballs, well, quite regularly, certainly in this last season. Maybe that's just me. I don't think it is, though. I think it's all of us, both personally, in our families, in our churches. Storms come, and the question isn't whether they'll come. The question is how we will respond or how we will react when they do come. And I think in life, it's often that we have these blessings and battles that we are dealing with. And we think that perhaps they will be consecutive, that if we have an easy time of blessing, that then we'll be in a fit state to cope with the battles. And then once we've got through the battles, well, we'll need a rest and a time of blessing. And we kind of think it's going to be like that, mountain followed by valley, mountain followed by valley. But that's not how it works at all, I don't think. I think it's more simultaneous, that they're like twin tracks that we navigate together. And if we look on one side of our life, there might be real blessing, real encouragement. But if we look on the other side of our life, there might be a few battles going on. And it's, both of them are happening at the same time. The issue is whether we get derailed by either of them. Actually, we can become derailed by success, but we can also, or pride, but we can also be derailed by discouragement and by disappointment. In the book of Proverbs, one of my favorite Proverbs, Proverbs 13 verse 12 says, hope deferred makes the heart sick. Such an interesting idea, isn't it? That if our hope is constantly put back, if the milestone that we're aiming towards gets removed and pulled back further, that our heart can get sick. It can actually, we can grow weary, we can grow sick in our hearts, in our spirits, because hope is deferred. So I think the question for us in a season where so much of our plans have been deferred, our expectations have been disappointed, things that we thought were certain become uncertain, and especially those of us who are leading in that space, the question is, how do our hearts not get sick, and how do we pastor and care for those who perhaps are feeling a bit heart sick in this time? And I think that's what resilience is all about. Resilience as disciples, resilience in our relationships, resilience in our ministries. It's not just about are we able to adapt, but are we able to grow stronger and to learn important lessons through what we're going through. Now, you may not know, but resilience is a topic that Mark and I have thought a lot about, and he's going to share a lot more in the next session. We both came from, slightly challenging upbringings, I would say. There was a lot of divorce and death and difficulty. And I think that meant that when we got to our early adult life, we're both built up some resilient muscles. Some of that was positive, some of that not so much. We find our own default mechanisms, don't we? But it meant we got married young. I was only 20 when we got married, and entered married life like with resilience in one sense, but then a complete lack of resilience in how to run our relationships and how to do marriage. And like every marriage, you have your up days and your down days, don't you? But we're still going 26 years later, so a bit of resilience has been discovered there as well. And then, as many of you know, Mark is a church leader of Waypoint Church, but over those last 25 years he has lost most of his eyesight, which has given us a huge empathy for those who are dealing with chronic conditions, for those with disabilities, and for me, for those caring with those disabilities, people who maybe have a child with additional needs, or an elderly parent, or a spouse who has extra needs of one kind or another. And I think we have huge compassion on people in those situations who are often having to display the most extraordinary resilience. And they're often the people who, they're not just people who deserve our pity and our prayers, they're actually often the people we can learn the most from, because they've had to really dig deep and discover some important truths about how to keep going. Some of my favourite verses in the New Testament are from the beginning of the book of James, in James 1, where it says, "Consider it pure joy, brothers and sisters." I do think that's taking it a bit far, but anyway, "Consider it pure joy, brothers and sisters, when you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking in anything." Over the years in church leadership, we've often said if there was another pathway to maturity that we could find, we would love to find it. But it often seems that trials, suffering, challenges, ups and downs of life is what creates maturity. Maturity in relationships, maturity in faith, maturity emotionally, in all kinds of ways. It's often those struggles where we actually learn the most. None of us would volunteer for it unless we're a bit bonkers. Actually, none of us would put our hand up and say, "I would just like a few more trials because I really want to just be mature and complete." But we do want to be mature. We do want to grow stronger. We do want to not lack in anything. But most of us would prefer to sidestep the process that often leads to that. And I don't want to trivialize those trials, particularly not at the moment. But I did do quite a lot of research, particularly over this last year, just before Fresh Streams last year. No, just after Fresh Streams, my new book, Irrepressible, came out, which is all about resilient, 12 principles for a courageous, resilient and fulfilling life. And I did loads of research. We're going to dig into a couple of the principles here in our next session together. But there were some things in there, just to summarize in a couple of minutes here, that we're going to unpack more, that I think are really important when we begin to think about resilience. I'm going to encourage us to think about three things. And the first one is this: roots. So it's about what's beneath the surface. If we're going to be resilient, we have to think about our foundations. Japanese buildings can cope with all kinds of earthquakes because of what's beneath the surface, how they've been built. And what you can't see always defines what you can see. It's always that iceberg principle. What's most important is what's most hidden, is everything beneath the surface, our roots. Where is our identity? How close to God are we? How secure are we in who we are? I love those verses in John 15, which are such a key to resilience, aren't they? Where it says, "Remain in me and I will remain in you. Apart from me, you can do nothing." That whole sense of, are we rooted? We're not focused on remaining in success or remaining in happiness or remaining in wealth. We are focused on remaining in God, knowing that He is in us. He's the treasure in our jars of clay. And when we are invested in those roots, in a deep, secure roots, that when the storms come, we've got foundations. We know who we are, we know what we value, we know what our purpose is, and we know whose we are, and that will help us to stay strong. So that we need those roots, we need to remain in Him. But secondly, we need internal strength. So resilience is partly about what is in us. So this is about our well-being, it's about our habits, about our rhythms, about our spiritual nourishment, about creating healthy boundaries, about how we're growing as a person, how we're developing. It is all about knowing ourselves, having self-awareness, and growing in especially in the habits and the choices that we make. And we're going to think about some principles that think about how we look after ourselves and how we make sure that internally we are growing in resilience. We're building those resilience muscles. But lastly, apart from our roots or our internal growth, we also need external structures. If you're going to grow a plant in the garden, you need trellis or some kind of support to help it grow if you want it to grow tall. And that's very true in all of the research about resilience. It's not just about gritting your teeth and trying harder. None of us have the internal resources to cope with everything that life throws at us. We're just not designed that way. We need external structures, and that could be, social services and, furlough payments in this last season, or it could be friendships, community, fellowship, having a wider purpose than just ourselves, being connected to something bigger than ourselves so that we know that we are not alone. If our internal structures are our habits, then our external support is our habitat. Our habits and our habitat are both crucial if we're going to grow in resilience. And we really need to think about how we're developing strong support structures and strong internal support structures, as well as making sure we're rooted in the right thing. And so I'm just going to remind you again of that amazing proverb that says, hope deferred makes the heart sick. But the second half of that proverb says this, but a desire fulfilled is a tree of life. So hope deferred does make the heart sick, but desire fulfilled is a tree of life. Isn't it wonderful? So the question is, if we are looking to grow as resilient disciples, as resilient leaders, resilient brothers and sisters, wives, husbands, parents, whatever it is, the areas of our life that we need resilience. The question is, if we want to grow that tree of life, we need to know this. Where is our hope found? What are we placing our hope in? And what is it that we desire? If desire fulfilled is a tree of life, what is it that we really desire? Are our eyes fixed on the certainty of Jesus, where our hope will be fulfilled? Or is it fixed on the uncertainty of life, on the storms that can really uproot us so easily? And so we're going to unpack some of this in our next Digging Deeper session. Mark's going to do that with me, as I said, and we're going to really look at how we've put some of that into practice. Not that we are world experts, because resilience is all about a commitment to continual growth and to continue building those resilience muscles. We haven't got it all sorted. We are just like you. We're on the pathway, dealing with the ups and downs and doing the best we can, but we do have a real desire to come alongside you as you build resilience in whatever areas of life that you're having to grow and adapt at the moment as well. So we look forward to seeing you in that session, and it is so great to be with you as we go back to the future as Fresh Streams Conference this year. See you later.
This is Cathy and Mark Madavan's workshop, Digging Deeper session. Don't know what it is, seminar, workshop, whatever it might be. I'm Sue Glover. I'm doing all the technical hosting. And if you could stay on mute unless there's a Q&A time, that'd be really helpful to save any feedback. They are amazing people, written lots of books, served in their church. I've got lots of stories about their resilience. I could go on and really spend the whole hour talking about them, but they've asked me not to, so I won't. Except I'll just hold up one of Cathy's books. This is one of 3, and it's backwards. This is the one that's based on this sort of seminar, I think. 12 principles for a courageous, resilient and fulfilling life, which is really good. And she introduced us, I think, last year, fresh streams to it, didn't you, Cathy?
It wasn't out last year. It was just about to come out. So,
but some of the principles now. I think you introduced, didn't you? Yeah. Okay, so without any more of ado, I'll shut up and I'll hand over to Cathy and Mark. So welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Oh, thanks. So thank you. And yeah, we will invite a bit of feedback and chat in this session. Bless you. I think your name was Sarah. I didn't hear you, but I saw you. So we will invite a little bit of feedback. We're going to stop at a couple of times for a bit of discussion. And it might be that you want to share something, or it might just be that you've got something you think you could contribute, or a comment or a question. So you can save those up, but you can also pop them into the chat. We probably can't multitask enough to read the chat, but Sue will be keeping an eye on that. So that will just give us the chance for a bit of interaction, because the last thing you need is to hear us gabbling along for an hour. So we are going to think about being resilient.
Can I just say one technical thing? If people want to put you on a bigger screen, if you do press the speaker view, it would make life easy. So you have to look at the little pixel, because we potentially could
go to view and then speaker view.
Top right corner of your screen. If you go to speaker view, then we'll get Cathy and Mark a bit bigger.
There you go.
Okay. Great.
I thought Christmas did that anyway, didn't it? Christmas made us a bit bigger.
Christmas has made us a lot bigger.
Yeah.
That the whole lockdown has really enhanced our territory.
Reinforced us.
Yeah. So yes, and welcome, really welcome to you all. I don't know why you've chosen to come to this seminar when there are so many great ones to watch, but my guess is that if you're here, it's because, like us, you think that either resilience is very important, you're having to lead people at the moment and help them to be resilient and to cope with some of the ups and downs of life, or maybe you yourself are having to really revisit this whole subject of just how you stay firm and strong in your faith with so many storms around us. And so we're just going to look at different facets really of resilience and think about some of the things that might help us and might help us to help others to be resilient and to be resilient disciples especially.
We're not sharing this because we're experts at this. We have been in serving God in different ways for a number of years. Can I introduce myself?
Yeah.
Okay. So I've been leading a church for the last 17 years, Waypoint Church down on the South Coast. And before that, I was associate minister at Andover Baptist. So I've been a minister for a long time. If you've read any of Cathy's books, you'll know that one of the major challenges in our family life is my eyesight. I'm registered blind, and that's been a gradual thing. And that's put some interesting challenges along the way, and continues, especially this past year, where it's really dipped a lot more. And so this whole thing about being resilient disciples isn't because we've got it cracked. It's because we still are learning and have to be resilient day by day almost, as we face lots of challenges, which we'll share a little bit as we go along.
And even leading a church online for Mark, as you can imagine, I'm looking at your screens and your beautiful faces, but Mark can't actually see the screen at all. So he looks in the general direction of the screen because, well, I guess it's...
I can't even see there's a computer in front of me.
So he does it because he knows it's helpful for other people on the other end, but leading his team and leading a church online this last year is, for visual impairment, I think a lot of people with disabilities actually, in some ways this last year has made church accessible in ways it never has been before for those with additional needs, but in some ways, especially for those who are visually impaired, both on screen and navigating outside has been really tough, hasn't it? Really, really tough. So that's a bit, that Mark leads a church here. I am more itinerant in my ministry, and we've got two daughters, one who graduated this year, but without a graduation ceremony last year, and the other one who's still at university, but online. So we have a house full at the moment with one of their boyfriends here as well. So it's a busy household, and we're just chugging on like you are. And we're really aware that when we come to the topic of resilience, it's not a competition, because we've got our own struggles and challenges, and we highlight a couple of those just so that you realise that we're just normal struggling people like you are. But also we're just very well aware that on this screen now there will be people who frankly have gone through or are going through some extraordinary challenges. So, you know, we're in it together, but we are also on this journey of faith together, and we really want to be able to pursue Jesus whatever comes against us. So I'm not going to go through the whole short video that was up online as a preamble that was on there for you to watch before this session in detail. I'm just going to quickly scoot through a couple of the points so that you've got them in your mind before we dig in a bit more. The basic premise of what I said on there was that we all go through storms of life all of the time. It's not a case of whether we will, it's when we will. And we can't control what happens in life, and nor should we try, but we can reflect on our response, and we can reflect on how we follow Jesus and where is Jesus in the midst of all of that. And resilience, as we'll look at, is really about thinking about our capacity to adapt, our capacity to be able to be flexible, and our capacity and our mindset to create healthy habits so that when those storms come, we are actually in a position where our resources aren't too depleted, and we've got the tools in the toolkit that we need spiritually, practically, emotionally, to be able to deal with the stuff that life throws at us. There will always be battles and blessings, and they're not consecutive. They're always simultaneous, aren't they? Like, you look over on one side, things are going really well. You look over here, not so much. And those things, those twin tracks, are always prevalent in our lives. The triumphs over here and the trials over there. And the reality is that we can get derailed by either of those tracks. Quite obviously, we can get derailed and discouraged and feel despair about things that are going wrong, the discouragement, the betrayal, the failures, the mistakes, the things that haven't gone well. Obviously, that can end up derailing us and demotivating us and causing us to doubt and to worry and all of those things. But equally, we can get derailed by success and things going well. That's quite interesting thought, actually. Sometimes when something's gone well, we end up kind of building an idol to that thing and go, well, if we did it that way and it worked, and we have to do it that way forever. And we kind of get stuck in a rut, and we stop being resilient because we've ended up creating a shrine to something that went well once. So maybe you've got more than one child. You'll know that just because what you did with one child worked well doesn't mean that it will work well with the other child. So we have to remember that even things that have gone well can end up being things that stop us from being adaptable and flexible. It is about being able to learn and reflect on all of these things. We live in that tension. And at all times, but particularly at the moment, there are things that we can do and there are things that we can't do. There are things that we wish were different, and there are things that we can cherish. And there's a proverb, and I mentioned it in the video, but we're going to come back to this a bit. There's a proverb that mentions both of these tracks, if you like. And I think it's been such a help to me, and we really hope it'll be a help to you. And it says in Proverbs 13:12, hope deferred makes the heart sick, but longing fulfilled is a tree of life. So hope deferred, when the goalposts are always moving, when our hope doesn't seem to be coming to pass, when the thing that we've prayed for doesn't seem to happen, then our heart can get sick. But longing fulfilled is a tree of life. Go back to Mandy's beautiful tree picture that she's got up on the wall behind her. And we're going to think about that image a little bit. And many of us this last year, I mean, talk about hope deferred, everything, every event, so many things, whether it's weddings, church services, holidays, conferences, so many things that were longed for and we were hoping for were deferred. And so there is a real danger for us that we can end up with heart sickness, and that those we care for are struggling with heart sickness. And so the question that we have to come back to is, what is our hope in? And if a longing fulfilled is a tree of life, what are we longing for? What are our desires? Have we inadvertently become people that put our hope in our plans, put our hope in our success or our work or all of these things? And are we longing for things that Jesus is asking us to long for? Now, as we've already mentioned, Mark and I have got our own, stuff that we have to deal with as far as resilience and struggles. And we've certainly known the whole hope deferred things. But the reality is none of us would volunteer for tough stuff unless we're really weird. But all of us know that it's often through the struggles and often through the tough times, not to minimize them, by the way, but it is often through those times that we grow the most. So I just wanted to mention to you before we get stuck in the verses from James 1. These are challenging verses, and they say this: consider it pure joy, which I do think is a bit of an overstatement by James there. Thanks very much, James, just a bit of feedback. But anyway, consider it pure joy when you face trials. Let perseverance do its work in you so that you become mature and complete, not lacking in anything. So here's the problem. We would all love to be mature and complete. We would love the people in our small group to be mature and complete. We would love our best friends to be mature and complete. We would love our churches to be mature and complete. But most of us really would prefer to sidestep the process of trials in order to reach that maturity. And we've often said over the years, we wish there was another way that people would grow and become mature other than suffering. But it just seems, as we've seen in church leadership, that so often it's as people go through things and grow through them, that is when their faith matures, their relationships mature as well. And so, yes, thank you, Sue, for mentioning the Irrepressible book. That I've got these 12 principles that I've been thrilled to see people using in their workplaces, in their churches, in different places. And I'm going to pull on a couple of those. Mark's going to speak about some other things. But the reality is we are all able to grow our resilience muscles in the good times and the bad times. And as we look back on this last year, the truth is there are some things that were going to be so hard this last year, but we've actually grown some muscles through them. And there are some things we're going to face this year at church or whatever that we go, do you know what? I know how to pick up that weight now because we did it before. We can do online services now, or I can contact, whoever by Zoom now. I never knew how to use Zoom a year ago. And we've adapted and we've grown some resilience muscles. And I think it would be a good thing to do for all of us as we begin this, or we're in the midst of this time together now, is just to look back on this last year and to track where you've seen growth. Really easy to see where there's been struggle and stress. That's not a question. But where can you say you can actually see growth through that struggle? Because there has been. It'll be skills, maturity, health. I don't know what it is for you. Everyone will be different. But there will be some things through what you've gone through this year that there'll be some resilience muscle that has grown in you. So all of the research into resilience says that there are kind of 3 areas to look at, and we're going to look through these briefly and invite some feedback. The first is roots or foundations, and then we're going to look at internal strength and external support. So feel free to pop comments in the chat, and particularly we're going to stop at different times and invite comments and questions as well. So let's start with roots and foundations. And if any of you can see Mandy's, that you can't see because you put it on speaker view, but if you want to, Mandy's got an amazing picture of a tree behind her, which might be a good thing to see. But if we're going to think about what we build in our life, the superstructure of our life, then we need to think about the substructure of our life, because what you build in your superstructure is only ever going to be as strong as your foundations. Your foundations, all the stuff that people can't see, that is the most valuable stuff. What you can't see always defines what you can see, all the stuff that's hidden. And Mark's just going to help us to think a little bit about what it means to think about those foundations. So,
the whole area that Cathy said is just so helpful in that resilience in life. There's a lot of positive things you can look back in this past year, even if it's been very, very tough. But I want to focus a little bit on that discipleship, because the topic we're looking at is that resilient disciples, followers of Jesus or apprentices of Jesus. And as I was just pondering about what to share, I was reminded of a tree we have in our back garden. A couple of years ago, we noticed as we were moving out of winter into spring, is that it was growing in a really weird way. Half the tree, there are leaves that were budding on one side, and the other half, they just weren't. The branches just were just staying as sticks. And I thought that was a bit unusual. And as the weeks unfolded, the half the tree was growing with more leaves, and the other half was just sticks. And we're thinking, this, how could half a tree die? It was really, really weird. And we're scratching our heads and umming and erring. And then the light bulb happened as we sort of worked out what the situation was. We were planning that summer to redo our patio. And as we were saving up money, we were trying to gather some bricks that we're going to line it with. And we stacked some bricks just to the side of the garden. And what we worked out was that the side the bricks were stacked, it wasn't like against the tree or anything, there was a gap there, but the side that the bricks were stacked was the same side that the tree was just not budding. It was really clear that one side was just not liking it and the other side was seeming happier. And we worked out what happened is the bricks, even though they're a long way away from the main stem of the tree, the trunk, is that the bricks were crushing the roots. We're obstructing the roots and stopping the roots from obviously getting the nutrients they needed to make the tree bud. And I was reflecting over this past year, there's been a lot of shifting around of bricks in our lives. Things that are normal has changed when it comes to just everyday lives and what we're allowed to do, but also when it comes to our discipleship and following Jesus, our normal practices of gathering as community, of worshiping as community, of doing things with small groups or life groups, different areas that were our natural ways of getting life, just had things moved around. And I'm sure you've noticed, I've noticed it in my own life, I've noticed it in people in my church life, is that some people seem to have coped very well. They're still blossoming and growing, where others are more like the bits of the tree, probably bits of my life, where there's sticks and not a lot growing out of it. And I think a real key part is the roots. It says in Ephesians 3 and also Colossians 2, it talks about having deep roots, to be deeply rooted in Christ, or to be deeply rooted in love. And the tree in our back garden, its roots, it had deep roots on part of it, but other roots weren't as deep. And so when life got shifted around, it got crushed and it had an impact. We were smart enough to shift all the bricks and the tree actually revived. But if we were a bit slow and we took time and we'll go, well, maybe next year we'll move it. I wonder, actually, I'm pretty sure it wouldn't have just damaged that half a tree, it would have killed the whole tree. And when it comes to us and being resilient disciples, it's a really important thing to look at our roots. As Cathy said, the roots are the substructure, the foundation. It says in scripture about being deeply rooted, as I just said in Ephesians and Colossians. And no, it's not quite roots, but it's still with the tree analogy. So please give me a little bit of flexibility here. In John 15, Jesus talks about, I am the vine and you are the branches. And he talks about remaining in me, being connected to the source. 8 times in 4 verses, Jesus says, remain, remain, remain. And I know we have to remain in Jesus, but so often we forget. And Jesus knew, that's why he said 8 times in 4 verses, remain. And just reflecting over this past year, I was wondering, where are those places where I've been disconnected, where the circumstances have changed around and squished me? I would say personally, one of the areas that sort of snuck up on me was corporate worship. Because obviously we couldn't gather together, and you watch it on screen and you sing a little bit, or you go, that sort of thing. But I, within my own walk with God, I always found that corporate worship where you could just, the band kicked in and you could just let it go. And when that got cut out, when COVID shifted some bricks on that and squashed that out, I suddenly found that my worship of God began to be restricted to, well, maybe, or thinking about it. Now, worship is more than singing great songs, but I suddenly found that it was impacting me. See, because I think if you look around, you all know people, maybe yourself, more likely you see it in other people, some people who have not coped very well in this past season. Their following of Jesus, their faith, their character, their identity, their whole being an apprentice of Jesus seems to have clicked down a number of pegs. And they're sort of, well, I'll tune in a little bit and I'll link in a little bit. And we can spot that in other people. But I want us to put the focus on us, on yourself, on me. Is what's happened with me? What do my roots have shown? Where has the shifting of coronavirus and the shifting of normality, where has it squashed some of my roots? And actually, real evidence is to look at the trees, look at where are the branches, where is the fruit coming out of our lives? And I want us to do just a little sort of a personal devotion here, okay? So this is in the privacy of your own head, so you haven't got to put hands up or wave or anything like that. But I want you to almost give yourself a little mark, just honesty between you and God, okay? On a scale of 1 to 5, 1 is I'm connected, drinking up the fullness of God, and I feel that I'm alive. And 1 is I'm feeling that my roots have been a bit crushed there. I'm struggling. I need to do some shifting around, or I need some help. This isn't about shame. This is about identifying us going in our garden and going, that tree does not look right. So what can we do to help? If you want to become a resilient disciple, if I want to become a resilient disciple, I need to be honest and go, what bits of my life aren't quite looking right? And then we can just say, God, what can I shift around? God, will you come in and help? So I want to go through just a couple of things, and I encourage you to just to score yourself from 1, not very connected, not very remaining in him, to 5, no, I'm doing really well there. And just identify where you are. And then I'm just going to pause and pray. What time have we got? We've got loads of time. Just going to pause and pray before Cathy moves on to some real practical things that we can do to be resilient, and some of those internal and external things that can help us. So just pause for a second, and I want you to give yourself a score between 1 and 5. 1 is not connected, 5 is very connected. Okay. So when it comes to you spiritually connecting with God, so with your prayer and your worship and your spending time in God's presence, maybe God's word, just spending time in God's presence. So that connectedness of God, where are you with you in your daily walk with God? How about with your relationships? Now your relationships fall in different categories. You've got the close family ones, and you've got your small group and neighbors and work colleagues. But if you had to give a general mark, what are your relationships looking like? Are they looking really healthy, despite having to go Zoom and all that jazz? Are they looking healthy, or are they getting on that towards that 1 scale and being a bit disconnected? How about physically? You know, we're called to go out and do exercise, and the way you eat. And we Cathy and I joked earlier that Christmas we sort of grew a little bit. But how are you doing with your comfort eating, or are you actually saying I discipline? Because we are connected creatures. God isn't just interested in how well you pray. God is interested in full maturity in all of our lives. How are you doing physically? Are there some roots that are being squashed there? How about emotionally? About how do you respond when things are getting tough? Are you laughing at the things you used to laugh at? Are you breezing through the things that you're breezing? Or are you finding yourself just tripping over and tearing up and flying off the handle a little bit? 5, no, I'm doing really well. 1, not so well. I could go a whole bundle of different things, but I want to just leave it there for now. I'm guessing, like me, there's going to be some that are higher scored than others. God does not condemn us. God says, I'm here to give you life. It's the Father's will. Jesus says in John 15, it's a Father's will that you might produce fruit. So remain in me. So let me just pray. Father, when we're talking about being resilient disciples, it's not about how good we are. It's about how good you are. It's about acknowledging that you are the source. You are the life giver. You are the one who allows us to bear fruit. Father, there are some areas in our lives that have been a little bit crushed because of this past year. Circumstances, people, just our own selves are not coping very well. Father, we just want to open ourselves up again to you and to say, you are the source. I want to remain in you. Father, let us put these roots, these foundations, so that all the really good stuff can be here from Cathy in a minute, will be really good tools, but those are tools, but you are the source. And we just confess again that we need you, that I need you. Pray this in the precious name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen. It's good stuff. And you might want to do that exercise a bit more fully with yourself. You might want to, I sometimes create a wheel of those different areas of life and just kind of like on the spokes, put where you are on that scale and see which spokes are looking a bit peaky and where the big lumps would be if that wheel was to go round. And like Mark said, it's not about shame or condemnation. It's about saying to God, you know, there are areas where I'm struggling. I might need a bit more support, might need to spend a bit more time reflecting and thinking, but hopefully some of the stuff that we look at now will help us to think about how we might approach some of those areas. We're going to look at the area of internal strength now, and after this section we're going to ask for your comments, feedback, any thoughts, comments. Someone saying this is very helpful. Good, thank you, Mandy. So first of all, it would be helpful maybe to define resilience a little bit. And I'd like to start off by saying it's very important for us to say what resilience is not. So being resilient is not the same as being robust. So somebody who is robust, we think of someone who is just super strong, just unbreakable. And the trouble is when we have a mentality that says, I just need to be robust, I need to be able to just keep going, then what happens is we are robust until we break. But resilience is not the same as being robust. Resilience is the admission and the acknowledgement that we are in fact all weak and we are all limited and we all have different strengths and different weaknesses and different limitations, and that we have to learn to live within that and to build habits and rhythms and disciplines and networks and things that will help us to be able to thrive despite the fact we are not unbreakable, robust people. So it's not about being robust. Some people use the analogy of the rubber band to illustrate resilience, and it's not a bad metaphor actually. That whole thing about being stretched, but not being stretched so far and for so long that we become brittle and we snap. Anyone ever entered the snap zone? I certainly have. Don't laugh at me.
I'm ducking actually.
Thanks. Just have a row on the Zoom call. Nice. But sometimes you can't, you need to be able to bounce back, to kind of go back to your original state. And in order to do that, you can't stretch too far for too long. It's a good analogy. In the natural world, resilience is defined. This is a great one, actually. It's kind of defined by those plants that grow in places where they shouldn't be able to grow. So when you see a tree kind of coming out of the side of a cliff and you think, how is that there? Or when you see those little plants growing up between the cracks in a pavement in the midst of the concrete, it looks impossible. Well, that in the natural world is defined as resilience, growth in the most unlikely places. I love that. But when I was thinking about defining resilience again for the research that I did in my book, I began to think about learning to play jazz. Now, some of you are musicians or musical and some of you aren't. So bear with me here about learning to play jazz. Now, the great Nina Simone, the jazz singer, said this. She said, jazz is not just music, it's a way of life. It's a way of being and it's a way of thinking. And a jazz mindset is different to a classical music mindset. A classical music mindset says every note has to be perfect and I have to do a perfect polished performance exactly as the notes are written. And that that structure, that skeleton that's on the page, that I have to stick to it rigidly. Whereas a jazz mindset goes, well, I know the musical principles, but honestly, we're just going to see where the music takes us, and we're going to take some risks, and we're going to step out and see if we can create new music with the principles in mind. Two different mentalities to playing music. And I was brought up playing piano. We actually sat in front of a piano here. And my piano teacher was genuinely one of the most terrifying women I've ever met in my life. Her name was Mrs. Keys. That's the truth. Her name was actually Mrs. Keys. She couldn't be anything else other than a piano teacher. And she actually taught my dad as well. And my dad said she was old when she taught him. So she was literally like a fossil when she taught me, a terrifying fossil. And she would make me drink lemon juice, and she would make me learn Esperanto phrases, this imaginary language that no one uses. To this day, I've got no idea why she made me do that. But then I would sit at the piano, and if I didn't get the notes right, she would yell at me. She was known every now and then to just smack my hands if I dithered. Definitely wouldn't get away with that in this kind of era, would you? And I would go to my piano lessons terrified about getting the notes wrong. But about a mile away from Mrs. Key's bungalow of doom was my grandparents' house. And they were a wonderful Welsh family from very humble beginnings. But my grandfather, who could not read a note of music, could play almost any instrument you put in front of him. And he played the piano like you wouldn't believe. And I'd go down there with my note perfect Moonlight Sonata going, do you want to hear my piece, Grandpa? And he'd listen, and he'd be very encouraging. And then he'd say, shuffle up, Cathy. And he'd sit on the stool next to me, and he'd say, what key do you want it in? And he'd bam out Moonlight Sonata with a boogie woogie bass line, and kind of in any key you like. And I mean, Beethoven would have literally died. It would, it's definitely, all the classical musicians are shuddering as I speak. But he made the piano sing. The joy of music that was in that house was extraordinary. And he used to say to me, there's no such thing as a bum note in jazz, Cathy. It's just a note leading you to something new. It's a completely different mentality. Now, there's more I could say about that, but it's so important for us to have a jazz mindset that expects to take risks, that expects for life to not be note perfect. Sometimes we have this idea that things should plan out exactly as we've planned them. Well, that's been shot to pieces, hasn't it, this last year? But generally, we think we're in control. We think if we put a date in the diary that it will happen. We think that if we make a financial plan, it will come to pass. We think that we're in charge of our life, but actually it's much better for us to go, do you know what? Things might have to adapt. Things might have to change. Some people are really good at this. They're real early adopters. They love a change. Other people, you have to throw a stick of dynamite at them to even consider a change. You've got both in your church. This is absolutely true. But in order to be able to develop a jazz mindset, we do need to make sure that we are looking after ourselves so that we have the capacity in us to be flexible. Because most of us really struggle with being adaptable. When we're struggling, we cling to certainty. We cling to the things we've known when we are really feeling the pressure. And so there's lots of things we could talk about here about building healthy rhythms, being an accumulation of our choices, creating healthy boundaries, dealing with transitions, and some of those I talk about in the book. But there's just one to mention now, something which will help you as you develop this mindset, is to ask yourself a question today. And that is, and it ties into what Mark said a little bit, but it's to think about how full your tank is. So there's a book called Fill Your Tank. So here's the thing, you've got an emotional resource tank inside you. You've got physical resources, emotional resources, intellectual resources. But at the bottom of this tank that you have, there is a tap, and that tap is always on, isn't it? The drain is always on every day. More emails coming in, more pressure, more questions, more uncertainty, more news updates on the news. That drain is always on, and sometimes it's on fast. Other times it's just dripping. But the question we have to ask ourselves is there more going in the top than is coming out the bottom? Because there is no tank filling fairy that is going to do this for you. The only person who can look after your own resources is really you, asking God where it is that you need replenishing and you need refilling, that you don't go from boom to bust of just like going on, you know, we go on a holiday to fill ourselves up and then we just drain ourselves dry for the rest of the year. That's not a healthy rhythm. If we manage to create rhythms whereby our tank is full enough most of the time, then that means that when the changes come, when the chord changes and there's another adaptation or there is another uncertainty, something else is thrown at us, that we've got enough in our tank to be able to draw on. We've got some capacity in us. And it's not about being selfish. It's about that whole, you know, that thing on the airplane they say about put on your own oxygen mask before you try and shove oxygen masks on everyone else's face. You're no good to anyone else if you can't breathe. And that's the reality. And for many of us, we love helping other people and serving and handing out the oxygen masks, but we need to make sure that we're looking after ourselves. So let me just ask you a couple of questions, and then I would really appreciate your comments, your insights on this, because there's lots of wisdom on this Zoom room. How are you as far as your tank? Where do you need replenishing? What are your energy and motivation levels at the moment? Consider where your drain is on. Like, which areas of your life is that drain on full blast? Where maybe is it just dripping but needs a bit of constant supervision? Are there some areas that are draining you dry that actually probably you shouldn't be looking after at all? You should just delegate it to someone else. That's draining you because it shouldn't be something you're doing at the moment. Why is it draining you as much as it is draining you? But also, apart from looking at what is draining you, what fills your tank? This is something we often ask, isn't it? You know, people in a team here, what fills your tank? Because the truth is, it'll be different for you than it is for me. We're very different. So what fills our tank is very different. Some of you, just a walk out in nature will make you feel 1,000 times better. For the extroverts here on Zoom, having a conversation or a coffee with someone just brings you life. For the introverts, after a day of working, the last thing in the world you want is another conversation with someone. All you want is to just withdraw. That's Mark. We're quite opposite in that regard. So we're all different. For some of us, reading a book is like life fuel. For other people, that's like, it's purgatory. It's just, you know, it's purgatory to have to read a book, actually watching an inspiring movie or playing music. And it's really important that you know what fills your tank and that you don't feel guilty for trying to prioritize that. What fills your tank spiritually? Is it, you know, worship? Is it a, you know, the app? I mean, I've been loving the Lectio 365 app in lockdown. That's been a real tank filler for me. It's not for everyone. Not everyone loves it at all. But for me, it's been a real tank filler. So this is about looking after yourself, not as an emergency services, like you're sending yourself to A&E for an emergency refill. This is about saying, what habits can I put in my life, or have I put in my life? Maybe in lockdown, you've done better at putting some things in your life to manage your resources. Where am I being drained? But also, what fills my tank? So we're really happy for you to just one by one, if you wanted to unmute yourself or if you wanted to put something in the chat, what are your observations about this whole thing about resilience and your tank and what drains you and what fills you? Are there any observations, any comments, any questions? Is there something you know you should be doing or could be doing to replenish yourself further? Happy for any kind of conversation at this point before we move on. Feel free. You're going to have to unmute yourself if you're going to do it. Someone's going to have to be first. Someone be brave. Lots of scratching heads. Oh, Peter.
Go on then, I'll be brave. It just occurs to me, I think that's really, really helpful, this business about your tank draining out. What occurs to me though is something I struggled with in the first lockdown, is other people wanting to come and take a bucket full of whatever's in my tank and help themselves to it. Yeah. So that sense of learning to kind of be in control of what's coming in and what's going out and how it's going out. I've just sort of broadening the analogy a little.
So that's really good. So what does that look like in reality then? If you know that you have responsibility for this resource and that other people will take control of your tank anytime you let them. So what does that mean for you then? What did you learn through that about how to manage that?
I think all of this came as a huge surprise to everybody, didn't it? So different people that we are leading coped with it in different ways. Some of whom their first reaction was to say, here's my problem, you've got to deal with it. Please, will you help me? And so passing the buck on to me, and in effect, sort of, I need to scoop out, the analogy could go horribly wrong here, but I need to scoop out some of your resource to deal with this issue, and having the kind of wisdom to be able to say, or the resilience to be able to say, actually, no, you've got this. Yes, I'll stand with you. Yes, I'll support you. Yes, I'll help you. But you've got the resources to do this.
And I think I just add to that, because I think, especially as leaders, sometimes when things just go extraordinarily challenging, sometimes we just have to dig deeper. I know when we moved into lockdown, I was quite tired. I was due to go on sabbatical just as lockdown hit, and because I was exhausted after a lot of stuff, and I had to put the whole sabbatical on hold, but still had to give to the church as we went online. And it's just draw deeper, draw onto God more, and sometimes you just have to sacrifice of yourself more. But that's limited in how much you can do that, because you can sacrifice to the point where you just burn out. And there is an interesting, that elastic tension.
And as leaders, I think we have a terrible tendency to rescue people. And what that does is it disempowers them of learning to be resilient themselves. Same as parenting. You've heard that term, helicopter parenting. If you just come in and solve all your kids' problems for them and take their PE kit every time they forget them, then they never learn to remember their PE kit. And it's the same as church leadership, isn't it, Peter, and all of us here. When you're responsible for other people, if you constantly give them their PE kit when they forget it, they never learn to look after their own stuff. And so I've got a chapter in the book called Run Your Own Circus, which is about understanding healthy boundaries are an important part of resilience. That actually, running my own circus is hard enough. I can care about other people's circuses and I can help them to run their own circus. But actually, I can't run their circus for them as well as mine. I just don't have another life available where I can look after everything in their life as well as mine. But you're so right that especially in the tough times, because we so want to help people, we can end up running ourselves dry, looking after their buckets as well as ours. I think we've all been there this year. Fair play. Anyone else want to make a comment?
Me?
Hi.
My name is Ino. Yeah, what I wanted to say really is a bit of like almost a testimony, because God been teaching me about resilience lately, because for years I've been so busy with having my own children, but working with children and also running toddler groups in church and doing Sunday is something, a gift that God gave me to work with children. But then because there is needs everywhere, I kind of like take to the point that I got ill. And in the end, I wasn't actually giving it my best. And I end up actually with a chronic fatigue, and I actually stop everything. And but I feel bad, the fact that there is work out there and I'm not able to do it, and but God helped me a lot to actually learn is I need to work on myself. It's my relationship with him that is more important. I need to be good enough, well enough, and happy within myself to be able to give that what he's giving me out. And it's a shame that I have to come to that point to actually realize, but it will be good as a Christian to know it's not by doing that we're earning something from God. God rejoices the more we get to know him. We do less, but make sure we accomplish something. But to learn to actually say no, that's something I can't. When somebody asks me to help, I struggle to say no, and I'm learning that to just said, you know what, I know what you're asking me, I can do it, but at the moment I'm not able, because there is to find the priority and to just not really feel guilty to say no.
I think everyone on the whole screen that I can see, because I've got the view I can see, everyone is just nodding like crazy. I think we all, I think, thank you for your honesty in that. I think we all really resonate with that, because most of us, if we're even on this conference, it's because we are passionate and we are givers and we want to say a big yes to God. The problem is sometimes we say yes in 100 directions, which actually means we're not giving a best yes anywhere. Because we've not learned to say no in a few places. We can't say our best yes.
I think often we can say yes to everyone and actually inadvertently be saying no to God. Because I think you're absolutely right in saying, actually, it's my relationship with God which needs to be the foundation. And it's when you spend that time with God and saying, God, you need to be the Lord, you need to be first. And then your yes is off the back of that. But it's that focus and priority, exactly what you say that God's been teaching you.
I mean, it's encouraging, isn't it, to know that even Jesus had to spend time out with his father to know what his father's business was, because everything that Jesus could say yes to was good. Like everything he did was good. He was healing people, he was caring for people, he was bringing out the kingdom of heaven. There was no end to the good stuff. He wasn't going to get distracted on bad stuff, but even he had to work out what his father's business was for the season he's in. And that's a good resilience principle, really.
Very good.
Well, thanks for that. We're going to just crack on just for a couple of minutes, and then we're going to ask you to all feedback again just in this last section.
Cathy, Mandy's got a hand up. I don't know if you want to respond.
I didn't see you, Mandy. Where is
it? It's all right. I can come back at the end if you prefer. If you're ready to move on, it's fine.
Make sure you do, though, because it'll only be a couple of minutes. So make sure you store it up.
Come back. Yeah, there's a couple of things, and I think I'd like to share.
Bring it all in just about 3 minutes. We want it all. So the other thing just to say before we hear from you again is that, as I said, in all of the research into resilience, whether it's psychology, anthropology, sociology, that people look at, that we need internal support. We need to look after ourselves. We need to be able to make those wise choices. We need to be able to prioritize. We need good boundaries, all of those internal things that we've just begun to touch on there, and all the well-being stuff that Ruth Rice and others are talking to us about, which are so important and so helpful. But the other thing that is really crucial, and both of these are critical for resilience, is external support. So internal strength matters, but so does external support, because here's the reality. No amount of looking after ourselves or trying hard or gritting our teeth will give us all the resources that we need in life. No way. Like the challenges are too great. The losses are too great. The questions are sometimes too great for us to be able to do it on our own. We need external support, and that external support can look like lots of things. It can look like relationships, and one of the things that I'm very passionate about and I talk about in the book is build your tribe. Find people who get you and who celebrate your successes but will sit with you in your sadness. People who will tell you the truth, people who love you. Invest in relationships, build strategic relationships. Over the last few years, we've been really trying, those people we connect with, to really, instead of focusing on breadth, actually try and dig a bit deeper on depth in some key relationships. So part of that is really about building strong external support structures in your relationships. Just like if you want something to grow, it needs trellis, it needs a support up it. We all need that external support, but it's also external support. You know, if you think of this season, furlough has been external support. The grants to businesses have been external support. You know, for Mark, and he can share some stuff, there's practical support that we need because of Mark's disability that no amount of trying harder is going to get Mark to see, is it?
Nope.
So you need external support, people to help with DIY or driving or whatever, in order to be able to cope. Is there anything you just want to say about the external support stuff?
I think it actually overlaps with a little bit, you know, you're sharing the testimony of earlier that you came to saying yes to everyone until you just sort of fell in and you went to God. I think that often happens with external help as well, is that we can just try harder and try harder. And actually it's asking for help that is the real key. It's actually humility in asking for help. Most of us, so I'm not allowed to drive because apparently being blind and driving isn't a good combination. And so I have to ask people to give me lifts. And people, if I asked any of you, would you give me a lift? Obviously, if you're closer, you probably go, well, absolutely, yes. But flip it around. If you needed a lift, how willing would you be to ask someone, would you help me? Most of us are way quicker at saying, I'll offer help as opposed to asking for help. But actually, God designed us to be in relationship with one another. He designed church. He designed us to be together. And we need to humble ourselves and ask for that external help. It's because when you can get over that hurdle, all of a sudden you discover it releases incredible blessings of God to yourself and to those around. I've had that on this past year has been a really challenging year. Besides being tired, we just opened a £5 million building just before we closed it down, had some leadership challenges. And I just reached out to some friends that we've known for a long time. Cathy talked about build your tribe, which is a fantastic little phrase. There's a verse in Acts 4, verse 23. Peter and John, they healed the guy at the gate, and then they got arrested and told not to share Jesus. And there's a lovely verse. It says, Peter and John went to their own people, and they prayed and talked, and God moved. And
I like that.
They went to their own people. And who are your own people? They didn't give lots of advice. What they did is they gathered and said, be courageous in God. Their own people aren't just people who like you. They're people who love God and saying, but together we're going to be in God's mission. So it's their own people. Who are the people of God who are going to say, get your roots deeper. I'm here. Let's do this together.
So I guess, you know, just you've got a couple of minutes for feedback, but it is asking yourself the questions, what support structures do you have personally, professionally, spiritually? Do you have the resources that you need? Have you got those mentors, or have you got those wise friends? What are the things that mean it's quite hard for us? There might be some obstacles. And do you feel like you've got the external support you need in order to be able to thrive? And what one thing could you do? What conversation could you have? What coffee over Zoom could you have? What are the things that you could do? Because it's very easy to see our lack, and it's very easy to see what we would like, but we don't have. But where can we start? Where's our mustard seed that we need to plant? And where could we build our resilience with external structure? So if any of you got anything you want to feed back about resilience or the external stuff, there's a few comments. If someone wants to start talking, I shall read some of those as well.
Shall I go?
Mandy, go.
I'll just go for it. We were asked to think of we were asked to think of a word for this year. Last year was pretty awful for me. My brother's been in and out of hospital since February. We haven't seen him since October because of various things, not COVID, although he did get COVID, but it's not COVID related, but he's been very poorly. And so it was a hard year. I wasn't hearing from God at all. And at the beginning of the year, we were told to think of a word and ask God for our word. Now, because he's a generous God, he gave me two. So the one was nurture, which is to take care of, protect, feed someone or somebody. And the biggest thing when I looked at nurture was he was saying to me to nurture myself. So it's not about nurture, it is about nurturing relationships and fostering relationships and my marriage and everything else, but to nurture myself first. The other word he gave me was focus. And I think for me, it's something about in resilience about changing your focus. So he gave me a picture of I've shared it in another group, but of a bow and arrow and somebody actually aiming at a target. And I said to my husband, do you know anything about archery? Because I don't know anything. But he's been doing some research into medieval weaponry, and one of the things was the bow and arrow. So he said to me, in a long bow, they start on the shorter bows and then they grow and they grow and they grow. And you said something about resilience muscles. And apparently for the very long bows, there's only very few people who are able to use them. And it's about a different muscle. And what he actually said was they pull back and the resistance and resistance, almost to the point of stopping their own breath. And they still, and they look at the target and then they aim. And for me, there was a very big picture in that about I'm a person who keeps busy, but there's something about that stillness and that spending time in the quiet with God, not being so reactive, but just waiting, and then doing what God tells me to do. So that's how I'm going to try to be more resilient. The other thing he said, two more things, sorry, just very quickly.
We've got about 30 seconds left. So
sorry.
Please.
Oh, different arrows for different targets. So whatever you're trying to go at, one might be worship, one might be prayer, whatever. It's not going to be the same thing every time. And the arrow doesn't always hit the target first time. It might look like it's going off course, but eventually it's going to get where you want it to go. So not to be disheartened if it doesn't look like it's going to hit the target. Sorry.
You know what, write that down and send it into Fresh Streams for us, because I think that probably is a word for a few people at the moment. It kind of resonates with some of the things people have written here as well. Thank you for the comments. Someone said, Liz said, I'm a bit unusual. I say sometimes when resilience was given out, I wasn't in the front row, I was on God's knee. What a fantastic, thank you so much. So much stuff to deal with, but I keep on keeping on as a result of prayer. I think that really resonates with some of what Mandy said there. Stephanie said her role as a church secretary has kind of almost evaporated overnight, and to not have all those things to arrange, you feel like you've had nothing to offer. I think that's so true. So many of us have had stuff stripped away. All of my work as an event speaker disappeared overnight, you know, and you suddenly realize you say your identity isn't wrapped up in what you do, and then you go, maybe it was actually, and you have to go back to that thing about sitting on God's knee and pulling back, as Mandy's just said there, and realizing it is in sometimes the drawing back that we enable ourselves to be able to move forwards again. I know our time is up and you're all free to leave, but is there anything else that anyone wants to say before we finish and we maybe just close in a prayer? If you've got a few minutes to hang around, let's just close with some prayer. But is there anything else that anyone would like to say? I feel guilty, we haven't given you enough time to talk. Please feel free.
I really relate to that idea of needing external support. I think in March, before March, I was sort of always busy. There was always something doing, didn't have to really focus on me at all. I was good at it, and then got the shielding letter in March and ended up stuck at home for 9 months, and my doctor wouldn't let me go back to work even after shielding ended. And I very quickly learned that I'm really, really bad at asking for help and support. And it was in this place, and I thank God for it, because I actually learned to start building those deeper relationships with people, and they've made such a big difference. So if you can't do it, I recommend trying it.
Absolutely.
We so agree with that. We've got such amazing relationships that we've built because we've had to ask people to come and do things that Mark can't do, and they're privileged. They feel privileged to serve you, like you would feel privileged to. We're meant to do this, aren't we? But maybe we'll come out of this with some stronger relationships. And also in our communities, we've served our communities where people have put their hands up and said, I need help, I don't have enough food, or I don't have enough of this. Our churches have stepped up and blessed people in our communities, and our relationships with people in our communities, I think, are going to be stronger at the end of this time. Well, I don't want to push on any further because our time is gone. So maybe I could just ask Mark to pray for us at the end of this, but feel free to hang around afterwards and put a chat in. I know you've got other stuff to do, but maybe Mark would just pray for a minute.
Yeah. Father, we want to pause and sit on your knee. We want to hear the breath of God. Often we chase the voice of God, what you want to say, but we want to just hear the presence, your breath. Father, it comes back to our relationship with you, to be that resilient disciple. There's lots of things we can do, fill our tanks and extra help, and that is all really, really important. But it begins and ends with you, Jesus. And Father, I want to pray that we may have that centering on you, and then walk out in the strength and courage of that. We have the wisdom of that, of drawing from your resources and then serving your world, the world that you love, joining your mission. I thank you, God, that you, for some reason, have called us. And I thank you for that. But you haven't called us to do lots of tasks. You've called us to join your family, to work alongside you and with you. I thank you that you have love just at the heart of who you are and what you've called us to do and to be. Father, bless these folks who have joined us this time. Father, let your words just to take root in us. Those words that were just from us and just lovely words, let them float away. But the words that were from you, Father, I pray that they'll just touch our heart. They may be little keys that unlock something of you, that we might become more like Jesus as a result. The one who is the perfecter of our faith, the one in whom we follow, the one who saved us. So we fix our eyes on you, the author and perfecter of our faith, and we follow you. Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for contributing. Thank you for the picture that Mandy gave as well. If that's anyone help, they might want to get in touch with her somehow. Thank you.